must you believe in a supreme judge to believe in inalienable rights? And if not, where did this notion of inalienable rights then come from? Rousseau obviously will help us maybe a little bit with our reading of that, our questioning of that. We therefore do, in the name and by the authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states. They're absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved. And that is free and independent states. They have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states may have right do. And then, of course, the final line, to tell us how serious the signers of this declaration were in fact, and for the support of this declaration with a firm reliance. I think it's no question that what made Lincoln such a great rhetorician in his own right was that he knew this document really well, and he understood the power of a simple adjective. Notice the word firm. A firm reliance on the protection of divine providence. Notice now it's not the supreme judge, it's not the endower, it's divine providence. We mutually pledge to each other. Notice the pledge is to each other. It's that powerful ability to say we are all in this together. Our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Much has been made, of course, of the fact that so many of the early American thinkers love their trinities. I've commented on this in our study of St. Augustine. You can go back and find those lectures at LearnStrong. But I think those trinities are really important. So you notice the three: our lives, our fortunes, our sacred honor. Notice the profound emphasis of the word honor as the very last word of this document. Because, of course, honor has multiple meanings. We are supposed to, as colonists, consider George III as being honor, right? Honorable, and the honorable king, and all of that. To end with, of course, the word honor is to end as well with an abstract concept, and yet it seems to stand, rhetorically speaking, behind everything else, because, of course, the word means respect. And this notion of respect is paramount in the thinking, rhetorically speaking, of what Jefferson's pulling off. Well, let's go ahead now and finish by asking about our Big Five. What does this text say about epistemology and what we can know? Well, now that is an interesting question for this document, because as we've said many times, we have kind of three, epistemologically speaking, three possible positions. One is the absolutist position. I know, I'm right and you're wrong. But of course, we've said before, that can be a very dangerous position to take, which often has led people to argue that the other side, the relativist position, there are no absolutes, and therefore everything is relative. As we've said, the performative contradiction seems to suggest that if you say there are no absolutes, you're positing at least one absolute in the fact that there are no absolutes. And we've said then that because we may not want to always be absolutist in our epistemological thinking, and we absolutely probably never want to be relativist in our epistemological thinking, what third position can we take? The fallibilist position. I think I'm right, but I could be wrong. The scientific position, we might say. The Jeffersonian position, we might say. And yet, notice, we hold these truths, absolutes, to be self-evident that all men are created equal. Now, what's fascinating is that, you know, as we say in our previous lecture, nobody writes essays on "It Gets Dark at Night," because that is self-evident. When Jefferson says we hold these truths to be self-evident, is he in fact saying it gets dark at night obvious? Or is he rather saying it ought to be self-evident? Brilliant, brilliant epistemological sleight of hand there, using obviously the philosophy of Rousseau and Locke. And yet, let's say epistemologically, standing really behind this notion of self-evidence is this notion of the fallibilist position. I think I'm right. We think we're right. We could be wrong, but we don't think so, and we're willing to die to prove that we think we're right. Ontologically, what does this text say about who we are? Well, we're free. We're free, right? We are free, endowed by the Creator with certain unalienable, cannot be taken away rights. Right? What does this text say about psychology and the fighting spirit? Well, you have to overcome the fear and the anxiety. He calls them at the very end the good people, right? That is to say, this notion that we are in fact not bad people, even though technically we're breaking the law. There's a lot of fear that's associated clearly with this text. And Jefferson is trying to allay some of those fears and say, we have the right, we have the duty to do what we have to do here in terms of declaring our freedom, our liberty, our independence. What does this text say about sociology? I think this is one of the most profound sociological texts we can study. That use of the word "we" is powerful. To go from the very beginning to the very end of the essay with that profound "we." The pledge, the dedication, again, go back and take a look again at Lincoln's Gettysburg Address and see the ways in which those two documents are going to play together. It's quite remarkable. What does this text say about theodicy and the fact that there is pain and suffering in the world? He mentions suffering a number of times in this essay. I think that the key argument here is that what we have said many times in 303, pain has to be understood as propedeutic. Suffering is instructional. It's didactic. There's something to be learned for it. It's telling us something. We ought to learn from it. And of course, we're going to stand up for what we believe in. No question about that. At 2A, what are our major messages here? Well, independence obviously demands courage, a willingness to die for what you believe to be right. Martin Luther King Jr. will say the same thing a number of times. We'll obviously spend some time with Letter from a Birmingham Jail to marvel at the connectivity, the contiguity between ideas, from Jefferson to Lincoln to Martin Luther King Jr. Another major message here is we don't change governments for silly reasons. When you are ready to alter government, you better have really well thought out reasons for doing it. And of course, Jefferson's notion of limited government to secure rights and to do about basically nothing more than that is a compelling idea or message as well. At level 2B, the rhetorical techniques, obviously the parallelism, the anaphoria, we've already talked about all that stuff. The symbolism, as we always talk about it at 2B, we talked about the bands. Think about how the word he, the pronouns here in this essay are important. The word he becomes a symbol of the tyrant or the despot. And you might say the acquiescent parliament that's allowing so much of this to happen. What about at 2B, what about the irony? We're always looking at texts from the ironic perspective. Well, it's interesting to me that buried in the Declaration of Independence, often unnoticed, because as you read through all of these he kinds of comments, it can almost get to the place where it's like, yeah, okay, dude, we got it. And yet the 29th paragraph says the following. Let's just talk for a second about how ironic this is. He has excited domestic insurrections amongst us and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers the merciless Indian savages whose known rule of warfare is an indistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. Well, now, wait a minute. What do you mean, merciless Indian savages? I thought all men are created equal. It may be, ironically, this, one of the most disturbing lines of the Declaration. And as we look at a document like this, we have to own up to the fact that this will be, of course, a harbinger of sad and tragic things to come. We think, obviously, of the classic text, "Bury my heart at wounded knee." There's no question that this kind of a line is one we have to investigate. But my argument is this. Does a line like this, and obviously our abhorrence of a line like this, lead us to then jettison the entire project? I just don't think so. And I think that's a poor reading of history. I think it's a far better way to look at the irony of a text like this and a line like this, and then to embrace the paradoxes. Again, I say, you're sitting here, aren't you? Finally, at 3A, let's ask about this idea as it relates to Lao Tzu's Tao Te Ching and the understanding of the leaders and government, Machiavelli's The Prince, Rousseau's ideas of social contractarianism. Jot down in your notes the ways in which those are, for you, parallel ideas or contrastive ideas. I've already mentioned Plato's Republic, hypercritical that I think we have that as a background, although it's not totally clear how much Plato, Jefferson actually knew. Certainly I think he knew the fundamental concepts of Platonism. We've mentioned the Gettysburg Address. We've obviously mentioned Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech. I'm going to ask you, though, to write down and be looking forward to our study of Letter from a Birmingham Jail, where we're going to play some other games as well. I'm also going to mention here, and I could have done this earlier, I just was saving it for this discussion, the great Russian writer Solzhenitsyn and his Gulag Archipelago. I think that, you know, there's something to be said here about such a genius text. The great Jordan Peterson has argued that maybe is the most important text of the 20th century. I think he may be right about that. What does it mean to respond to a totalitarian state in the form of Russia? I think Solzhenitsyn has done that as well as anybody in the 20th century. Finally, at 3B, how can I relate this information to myself personally? How can we do that? What was a time, for example, this question, what was a time you had to fight for your independence? A time that you really had to struggle, and you had to do it in an intelligent way because you knew it would redound negatively on you if you didn't. And it might redound negatively anyway. What was a time when you failed to fight for your independence and for your freedom? See, one of the arguments that we're making in 303 is that you have to fight for your intellectual independence and for your intellectual freedom. And that is hard work. The easy thing, obviously, is to walk away and not to do that. Let somebody else tell you what to think. A final question. Why do you think it is possibly true that so many think that your generation is unpatriotic? Why do you think that your generation is not more patriotic? And how can you address that issue in your own personal life as well? Why is it that when you hear the national anthem, it's possible that maybe you don't feel that tremendous sense of pride for your country, with the possible exception of maybe the national anthem being played at the Olympics when an individual has performed amazingly for his or her country? Why is that, do you think? And can you allow an essay like this to at least begin to challenge you a little bit, to take some sense of, well, the last word is honor, from your cultural legacy? I hope that our study here of this amazing essay has done that for you. Thank you.